Yeah, my name is Joachim, and I'm here to talk about page speed today. And before we dig into what we have done, I would like to set the context. So, what is page speed? Also, why are we talking about page speed, and what is the objective of this talk for you guys? So, what is page speed? In this context, page speed is when you go to the page speed insights by Google, you type in your URL, you click the analyze button, and you get a big report from Google saying something like this. This report has 3 sections: the core web vitals, the diagnostics, and the opportunities. And we'll dig into these 3 sections. The first one is the core web vitals. This was introduced by Google in 2020. It was introduced by Google to actually obtain measurable metrics around page speed, but also measurable user experiences. So what they are doing is that in your Chrome browser, they are actually, when you are browsing the web, they are anonymously sending data from your Chrome browser to what Google calls the Chrome User Experience Report. And this report revolves around 3 areas. The first one being the loading category. This is a category of metrics that has to do with when you fire the request, you get the response, how fast is this? Also, how fast does the page actually load before you see something? There is a category of interactivity. So this means you have the response now, the browser is rendering the response. How long time does it take before you can actually click a button, right? And there is a category called visual stability, which is something we all bumped into, literally, because that has to do with when the browser has rendered something, then maybe a half a second, 1 second elapses, and then something jumps around. That is what Google refers to as visual stability, or instability in this case. Also, very importantly, the core web vitals is used as a ranking factor. So that means that these metrics and this test, called the core web vitals test, is actually used directly in Google's algorithm to rank you between your competitors. So obviously, this is a very important subject for an e-commerce store. This is the old one, the good old page speed score. This is the one we had before, the core web vitals. This is very much tied together with the opportunities. These are the suggestions, warnings, opportunities, call them what you want, that Google present to you, so you can actually increase your page speed score, but also improve your core web vitals test. Yes. So, why are we talking about page speed? So basically, it's money, which fits very well with the business track, of course. But this has 2 sides to it. So when you have faster websites, I just said that that will lead to better rankings. So better rankings will lead to more visitors. More visitors is more orders, and more orders is an increase in revenue, right? It also gives a better user experience. And that also comes with a better conversion rate, and that also leads to an increase in revenue. The goal of this talk is that you in 3 or 6 months will have a website as fast or even faster than this one. So that's my hope for you. This also shows that this talk is mostly based upon a use case, which is one of my clients, the2.dk. When we did these page speed optimization, we didn't have kind of a clear-cut path. We tried to prioritize our efforts, and that is also, with this talk, what I'm trying to do. I want to inspire you with this talk to actually work with this, and hopefully go from a normal Sylius standard page speed score to a pretty fast Sylius score. Yeah. So how do you prioritize your efforts when you have something like this, right? You can't dig into all of them at the same time, and probably there are some of these efforts or some of these opportunities that are actually more important than other ones, right? So I've come up with the prioritization framework, which is a very big overstatement, but it has to do with what are we actually thinking about when we want to do a page speed optimization effort. What are the talks that we have internally in the team, and what are the decision markers for such an opportunity? Obviously, this one is the first one. How easy is it to fix? How long time will it take to actually do one of these opportunities? More importantly is what is the effect of doing this fix, right? So that is basically in this context, how many seconds or milliseconds can we cut off for example, the load time, right? But what is also important is what pages or how many pages are affected by this fix. So if it's an About Us page or a contact page, it's probably not as important as if it's a product page or a category page. An example of that, Google has an opportunity called Serve Static Assets with an Efficient Policy. You get that warning when one of your, or several maybe, of your static assets doesn't have a cache header set in the response. It's very easy to fix. This is an Apache config. So, yeah, very easy. The effect is quite big, especially on subsequent requests, because when things are cached, it'll be fetched from the browser instead of the server. And basically, at least for my client, but probably also a lot of you, it will impact all of your pages. Yeah, so let's just do that, right? Now let's get into what we've actually done. First, I want to talk about the infrastructure of Vertu. Vertu is very simple. We have one server which runs all our services. So nothing special, but I want to pinpoint just two things here with regards to speed. We, instead of using Nginx or Apache, we use the Lightspeed web server. The Lightspeed web server is cheap. It's Apache compatible, which was very nice for us because we could take our existing configuration and just plug and play the Lightspeed web server. For a server admin, it took 1 day to set up, and depending on what type of page we tested, the gain in performance was 30 to 50%, which is pretty good for just changing a web server. So that was a no-brainer for us. Yeah. Then we have the Cloudflare. Again, the three A's, easy, cheap, and fast. What it does speed-wise is that it caches your assets on the edge, right? So you have like your CSS file, images, whatever. They are cached by Cloudflare, so when a user or visitor requests these assets, they will get them directly from Cloudflare instead of contacting your server. Also with Cloudflare, what I really like much about them is that they are kind of on the forefront of speed. And I don't know if you know this, but there is a relatively new HTTP status code called 103. It's called 103 Early Hints. And I'll just try to explain it to you by giving you the problem first. So the problem is that in a usual context, you'll have a client and a server. The client will then request the page from the server. The server will start thinking, what we call the server think time, and then it will send back the response. The response is then rendered by the client. The client sees that it needs the CSS file. It requests the CSS file. The CSS file is then sent back, right? So this is kind of the normal procedure. The solution, or at least could be a solution, but what is implemented now is that this early hints header, we have the same request to the server. But while the server is thinking about this request, it can send back a 103 response with a link header. You can see it over here on the right. That tells the client that when you get the response back, you will need this CSS file. So this means that the client can actually then send a request immediately to request this CSS file, get back the CSS file. Now the server is finished thinking, and it will send back the response. As you can hopefully see from my visualization, this will speed up things. And it's a very simple fix also if you use Cloudflare. Yeah. So how do you do this if you actually use Cloudflare? Or will do that after this. In Symfony, they have this web link component where you can add a link tag like this, and that will add a link header to your response. This link header is added to the normal response, to like the 200 OK response, right? But what Cloudflare does is then they take this 200 OK response, see if there's any link headers, then uses those link headers on subsequent requests. So that means if Victor is requesting vatu.dk for whatever reason, then other visitors after Victor, they will actually get that 103 response with the CSS file, because now Cloudflare knows, okay, we have this link header, we can just as well send it to the client immediately. So that is actually Cloudflare fixing this 103 early hints status code in a very nice way, I think. Very easy, very nice for developers. What did we do on the application level? On the application level, we have, in this talk, there are a lot of things you can do. In this talk, we'll have two sections of this talk: image opportunities and JavaScript opportunities. The first one is image opportunities. This is taken from the Sylius demo. And if you've run the page speed insights before, you've probably seen something like this, where you get a report saying that you could easily optimize these images and then save, in this case, almost 5 seconds, at least according to Google, right? So let's prioritize this one for the two case. We know that this was going to take some time, a lot of time, but we knew that this would be a huge effect if you fix this, because of all the pages impacted on a web store, right? So we went on with that. Just to give you an example of what are we actually talking about in savings here. This is an image from the Sylius demo, and I chose the pop-up just to show how much it is. So the pop-up image is 1.66 megabytes. Then I optimized that JPEG, and I optimize it again and then convert it to the WebP, and then I do the same for the AVIF. And as you can see, for the AVIF, we save, whoops. Sorry about that. We save 84%. And the magnificent thing here is that you can see the difference between this AVIF and the original JPEG. And that's, of course, what Google is hinting at when they give you this warning. Yeah. So our first thoughts when we wanted to tackle this problem was that Cloudflare, they had just announced a service called Cloudflare Images. And as everything Cloudflare, it was very cheap. You get the point, right? With this cheap. And it supported all the image formats that we wanted. So what we figured was that instead of just outputting the normal URLs for images, we would just output the CDN URL, right? And then things would just work. Well, it didn't. Because what we figured out is that Cloudflare, they will purge this generated image cache pretty frequently, not for very, very frequently used images, but for a lot of images, which ended up with our categories. Some of them would load very slowly, because then we would request images from Cloudflare that wasn't generated, and then you would see a page with no images, and it would take 10, 20 seconds to load a category page with images. So we went back to the drawing board and came up with a solution where we use Cloudflare still, But instead of using their CDN or their dynamic or just-in-time optimization of images, we would request each of these images. So we would request an optimized JPEG, we would request an optimized WebP, and we would request an optimized AVIF file. We would then save these files, and depending on what the client would use or could use, we would just serve these files from our Lightspeed web server. So that's what we did in a plugin that you can use. The idea is that you choose what images you want, you choose the filter sets, you run a command. This is very simplified. There are some more steps for a developer, and we made it all open source. So, of course, we would love you to actually use that and give us some feedback. That would be great. Next up, as I said, we have the JavaScript. JavaScript in this section is not your homemade JavaScript. This is not you making some customization where you make a modal when clicking on a button or something. This section is about external services where you inject some library. The magnificent thing about JavaScript is that it can screw up everything, especially for the core web vitals. So what we try to do in the 2 is that we try to avoid it. So how do we do that? The first one is the Google Tag Manager. This is a bit unpopular opinion for some, but my question is, do you really need it? There are, in my opinion, some big advantages of not having it. What you'll see in all the slides here now is that we'll have less JavaScript, and that's a big one for me, for speed. But for Google Tag Manager, I think as developers we have all tried being called up and then something has broken, but it was really somebody just injecting something in a Google Tag Manager that didn't work. Another big one, also in my opinion, is that when the marketing team or anybody else who's not a developer, they want to use some new service, they want to inject something, they want to track something, the advantage of not having Google Tag Manager is that they need to talk to the developer. So this developer can actually figure out, do we need this service? Can we get the data somewhere else? Can I make this smarter? Can I do this server side instead of client side? All those things a developer can sometimes think about, and maybe the marketing team or somebody else may forget, right? So for Google Analytics, what we did was that we created a server-side solution for that. It has less JavaScript. It is not blocked by ad blockers, so that means more data. So that's also good for the marketing people, especially in this age. And you choose yourself whether you want to abide by the cookie laws. Of course, we all do. I'm just throwing it out there. The disadvantages is that it's a bit harder to set up, and the client-side metrics, which are not, there are not many, but for example, the screen resolution and others, they are not reported. But if you don't use such metrics, it's I really think you don't have any excuse for not using the server-side implementation. As with all the coming slides, you can get the plugins on GitHub. At the 2, we also wanted to run A/B tests, and Google has a wonderful tool called Google Optimize, where in the standard solution, what you do is you import a rather large JavaScript library, and then you are able to actually drag and drop with a builder to figure out what do we want to test, change some colors, move things around. And then the JavaScript library will basically do that for you and handle everything for you. What we did was that we also wanted to do that server side. One of the biggest advantages of that is that you can actually have more advanced experiments when you do it server side, because now you know which group of people are having the experiment, what group of people are having the control. You know that on the server, so you can actually change Symfony Forms, you can change the checkout, you can change the whole template if you want to, depending on what you're testing. And it's in fact integrated with the Google Analytics plugin, so it also automatically sends the data to Google Optimize, so you can see the results in Google Optimize. As I said, the builder from Google is pretty nice, so that is the downside of this, especially for very simple tests. It is more tedious to actually change just, let's say, a color of a button by changing it in template, uploading to GitHub, pull request, all that, instead of just doing it in a builder, right? Yes, Facebook. With this one, the marketing team wins. I'm sorry about that. For this one, we both need the client side and the server side tracking. And the reason for this is pretty simple. Facebook are experts in getting your data from any website to their servers. So that means when we have the actual JavaScript library installed, there will be more data flowing. And the marketing team loves that because usually that means lower click prices. We actually tried with a server solution first, but we didn't get the quality inside Facebook that we wanted. There is a category of JavaScript services, or not JavaScript services, but services where you kind of use a JavaScript library where you embed any kind of widget that you want, but you embed it from an external service. This example is Trustpilot. Trustpilot is a, oops, just wait with that. Trustpilot is a review platform, a Danish one in fact, and you use it by injecting a JavaScript. Then you have then where you want your widget, you'll insert an HTML tag, and then this JavaScript library will turn that into, in this case, an iframe that will load 77 kilobytes of data, just to show like 5 reviews, for example. Yes. So what if we, instead of doing that, what if we just fetched the reviews from Trustpilot through the API, saved them on the server, styled it ourselves with our own HTML, CSS, and we could even cache it pretty intelligently because they don't have to change that much. This is not completely done yet, but the work is being carried out in this plugin, and pull requests are welcome. Yes. I just wanted to bring this. This is very similar to Google Analytics, but it is another category of services. Maybe you know Klaviyo. Klaviyo is an email marketing platform. And it is basically the same problems that we face as with Google Analytics. So we made it server-side. And again, as with Google Optimize, the problem with this one is that they in fact do have a pretty nice form builder. And we can't use that one, of course, when we use the server side. Or you can use it, the form will just not be shown. Yes. So this is in fact one of my favorites. The chat widget that everybody seems to use now, which is good. But they just inject it, maybe through Google Tag Manager, and not knowing that these vendors will actually load a lot of JavaScript to show this widget. So when you see these numbers, what you would expect is that everybody is talking to the chat, right? So how else could we actually, do it? But what I did, I asked one of my clients, and I asked them how many % is actually using the chat, right? And they came back with 0.6%. And this is not scientific, I know that, but I would also argue that you probably don't have like a 10% engagement rate on your services, or even 2%. So what if we, instead of doing that, we remove that, and then we have like 99.4% of the visitors will not have to load this JavaScript. It comes with I would say, bunch of disadvantages, but that's up to the developer. You cannot proactively start a chat when you don't have the library. Also, you need to handle opening hours. This is usually handled within the service. So that, in practice, that means you have to actually handle the bubble showing or not showing. Also, you need to load the library, of course, when you actually need the widget. We have not done this yet. This is a planned one, but one we would really like to do. The last one in the JavaScript section is also one of my favorites. It's the cookie consent thing. A great idea by the EU. Yeah, and I mean that very ironically. So how do we handle that in 2022? An external JavaScript, of course. So what these external services usually do is that some will try to block script parts or whole scripts, but the basic idea of all of them is that if you have a script that needs consent, this script can first run after that external consent script is loaded, which means we have to wait. The browser has to wait. Sometimes you will see things jumping around. It's not beautiful. And it's pretty logical. You also need this script on every page. Even though you have consented, you need it on the next page because you needed to actually load your scripts, right? So what I did is that I made the first paid plugin for Setono, where I know the consent status on the server instead. So in the plugin, when you want to inject a script, obviously you don't want to inject the Klaviyo one. We just settled that. But if you want to, you do it like this. You use a twig function. You tell the twig function that this is a marketing-related script, and depending on the consent status, this function will either output this. This is when there's no consent given. This is a script tag, but this script tag will do nothing because of, well, there's no source, but also the type. This is a pretty normal pattern when you do these things. But when we have the consent and we know it on the server side, we don't have to actually do this. We can just output a normal script. And we can actually leave out now all the scripts, the widget or modal or whatever we use to actually get the consent. We don't need that anymore. Of course, it also has some other features that you need for a plugin like this. It also has an integration with Google Tag Manager, if you still use that after this talk. But let me know if you need something like this. That's basically it for me. If you would like, I would like you to grab your phone, then send me an email with subscribe. Then I will send you the talk, but you'll also join the Sylius newsletter from Setono. So please do that. Yes, that's it for me. Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure. Any questions? Stefan has one.
You knew it, right? After implementing all these changes, do you see any uplift in revenue for this specific customer?
Yeah, so that's the best question, right? What Stefan said is that do we actually earn more after we've done these changes? And yes, the two earns more, and that is basically for their case, it's the rankings in Google. They were on a Magento 1 before, so maybe you would say it was easy, but the rankings went up and have continued to improve, and we're still working a lot of page speed, and we're also still working a lot of SEO for the two. So I can confirm that one.
Regarding the image optimization you did with Cloudflare, wasn't there any free alternative like Leap? Couldn't Leap do it for you?
And what should Leap do?
Leap should optimize the image with PHP-GD or anything else than Cloudflare.
Yeah, so why did we use an external service to optimize images instead of LibImagine? Yeah. So out of the box, it's an old bundle, but there are also a lot of things technically that if we actually want to do that, if we want to optimize our images ourselves, you have to keep up. I did try this 8 years ago or something. You have to keep up with the optimizations that you can actually do on images. You need to, for example, with this, it's not a new format, but I guess probably we're not all using it, this AWIF format. Then you need the converter, you need to fix all those things. When you have a service like Cloudflare, where I think it's $5, then you can store, I would say, I can't remember if it's 10,000, 100,000 images, and then you can serve these images, like request them, then it is a no-brainer, right? So we actually didn't go down that path of doing it ourselves because there are a lot of services that actually do it at a very, very fair price. Thank you very much. Have a great day.